and good evening to you all. It is finally starting to actually show a little bit of sun as we are finally coming out of the winter that has felt like it's lasted a very long time indeed. Now, I have been contacted by a few people regarding a couple of issues to do with the brakes. Now, this gave me an idea to actually just have a little discussion in a small video about if you have a drum brake Ford Focus Mark 1, that will be the majority of the models come with non-ABS drum brakes at the rear. Okay, now I'm going to show you a few things that you need to be aware of in relation to keeping the drum brakes working efficiently. Now, most Mark 1s will come with drum brakes at the rear and not discs. Now, for many years it has actually been very popular to fit disc brakes to the rear of a drum brake Focus, and basically it's a simple conversion. I say simple. You need to get the hubs of a disc brake model, you need the shorter handbrake cable. Okay, so that handbrake cable has to be changed because there's a longer one for the drum brake models, and really a few bits and pieces, and that's it. But there are some things that I don't really recommend you do if you have not already done this. Inherently, you have to ask yourself the question, why do people convert to disc brakes? It's very simple. It's better, they're more efficient. Drum brakes are really not efficient, especially on Mark 1s. They basically go out of efficiency and tune, as it's so called, very quickly, and I should tell you exactly why that is in a second. But the disc brakes, they work perfectly fine, and they are fantastic on the ABS models as they came out the factory. You cannot get a drum brake model with ABS, by the way. ABS was only a thing with models with rear disc brakes only. Okay, now the common issue, and this is what annoys a lot of people, drums are just horrible, aren't they? If you've worked on drum brakes, they are just nasty. I mean, my local garage once told me that they actually give drum brake jobs, like changing the shoes, to the apprentices if they've been basically pissing around. It's basically a punishment, and I can understand exactly why it is a punishment if you've had to try and get those return springs back into position with a good old flat blade screwdriver and some nose pliers. So equally, that's really the pain in the ass that they are. They are a pain to put back together with the springs, but overall there aren't really many issues. There's a couple of things that you need to be aware of. The backing plates on the drums, they can rot out. Mine are actually quite decent, but they can tend to get a bit crusty, so I just bear in mind that. Go around with a wire brush at some point and just make sure that yours has got no holes going through the back side. Now, the main problem with these drum brake models is that the self-adjusters, all of them are self-adjusted. You have an adjuster that self-ratchets out as the brake shoes wear down to keep the brake shoes very closely in contact with the drums. What happens is not that at all. They absolutely just stop working. They go lazy. They do not self-adjust. When they don't self-adjust, your brakes, both of them or one of them, I mean, in my case, both my adjusters for many years have been lazy. They don't ratchet up. I have to do it manually. But basically your brakes will be far less efficient. You won't really notice because they do very little compared to the disc brake models up front. Okay, the disc brakes up front will basically bear 80% of the braking. The drum brakes really just don't do much at all. So often people don't spot an issue until this happens. And one day you'll get in your car, pull the handbrake up, and it will absolutely go up to the sky. Now, to be fair, I did struggle with that. That was a bit of a fake one. Sorry about that, guys. But, you know. Now, that is because your self-adjusters have gone lazy. The drum brakes are working less efficiently. And then your handbrake, over time, it won't happen like in a week or two's time. It won't happen all at once. But over a long period of time, you'll notice that the handbrake lever just has to be pulled up more in order for the brakes to the handbrake to actually stop the car rolling, let's say, on a hill. So my test is always, I put it, well, in an automatic or manual, put it in neutral, put the handbrake on if you're on a hill, and if it holds, it's good. If it doesn't hold after about 4 clicks, and it has to be 4 clicks, 4 clicks is what Ford stipulates. You can go up to 6, but ideally 1, 2, 3, 4. Now look at where it's sitting at 4 clicks. That's where your handbrake should be. 5, 6, yeah, just, you know, acceptable. Any more, and mine goes up to 8. Now that tells you that my adjusters have gone a bit slack over the last year. The last time I looked at the adjusters was when I did the wheel cylinders last summer, and obviously I had to bleed the system, and I had to I changed the handbrake cable at the same time for a new one because that had stretched. And guess why that had stretched? Oh yes, I didn't know any better. Because what happens is when people, oh god, my handbrake's gone sloppy, what do we do? Well, as recommended by a lot of mechanics and a lot of people who just cannot be bothered to sort the real issue out, which is the adjusters, you just whip this cover back off. It's just held on with a couple of clips, and you've got this adjustment screw here and there. Now there should be a clip holding this on. Unfortunately the clip's gone missing, but I really haven't had an issue with that. Oh no, actually the clip's under here, sorry. The actual clip holding it still is here. That basically stops it from moving back off and slackening. You should have that silver clip right there, but basically you tighten it down a bit more and it becomes much more. Oh, look at that. Oh, I've got a nice new handbrake. No. What that's just done is it's tightened the handbrake cable, but because the adjusters are not adjusted properly at the back because they're not doing their jobs, the drum brakes are not going to be any more efficient than what they were before. You won't notice any difference. You'll have a really nice tight handbrake that will click on 4 clicks, but you put it in neutral on a hill and it still rolls. It still rolls down the road because the drum brakes at the back are not adjusted. So this is not a workaround to get your drum brakes working better. This is merely here, the purpose of this adjustment nut is to make sure the handbrake is nice and taut for you, okay, when the adjusters have been adjusted properly at the back. And I'll just show you that now. When I mean show you, because I can't be arsed, I am going to do this job in the summer, but essentially all that's going to happen is you'll have to take both wheels off and the drums off. Now remember, the hub nut holding the drum on can only be reused about 5 times. If you're not sure, look at the threads. If they look okay, they can be good to put back on. It's a huge amount of torque that you have to torque them up to. I think it's like 200 newton meters. There's a lot of torque for these hub nuts. But once you've slackened the hub nut off, the drum may need a bash. Obviously take your handbrake off because it's not going to come off if the handbrake's on. So take your handbrake off. Obviously have safety, axle stands, that sort of thing. And then you can hopefully get the drum off. You may need to pull it off. There's a couple of pulleys you can use that go on the studs, like the 2 puller ones, and literally you just wind it in using a socket and then it will just literally come off. Okay, if it's tight, that might indicate a good thing, but usually if the drums are really that slack, they'll slide off. They will get a bit stuck on the bearing. I think that's where it gets stuck mostly. But be very careful, don't be aggressive, because I've known people to actually wreck the bearing in the drum. If you have a bearing issue with your drums, because the bearing is part of the drum assembly, don't even bother getting a replacement bearing unless you've got basically an actual pusher, a kit that can actually push a bearing in, or a hydraulic ram to push a new one in. Don't bother replacing it. Just get a complete new drum, 2 new drums with 2 new bearings, and that will solve the problem for many years, and you'll have a nice new drum with a nice new surface that the shoes can score a little bit more. But the truth is, you only really need to do that if you're changing the shoes as well. So you've got a couple of options there. But anyway, once you're in, you'll see the adjuster. Okay, it's like, you know, it's got those little notches on the ratchet, and all you need to do is get a screwdriver in and bang that ratchet, and not bang it in. That's what you do if you're removing the shoes, but basically you have to try and flick it out. So you'll sort of get a screwdriver this way, and then you'll sort of flick it in to the actual cog, and it will open out a bit more, and you'll see the shoes physically move just a little bit towards the drum. And we're talking about 1 millimeter. We could be talking 1 or maybe not even 2 millimeters in order to get those shoes sitting where they need to be. Then what you do is you try and put the drum back on, try and slide it over the shoes. If you can't, you're going to have to back the adjust off a little bit. You've obviously gone too far out. So back it in, push the screwdriver in 1 little peg at a time. Be very careful. If you go too much, you have to back it off again. You have to push them out again. So it's a bit incremental. So go carefully. But once you've got the actual adjuster set and the drum just slides over the shoes. That is exactly how they should be adjusted. They're never efficient. I tell you what, if you've ever seen the sheet on an MOT braking test on these cars, they're never balanced. There's always about 5-10% imbalance, because that's how inefficient the drums are, and that's why many people have replaced them for discs. Less of this hassle and you get efficient brakes. Now, by the book, you shouldn't have to do any of that. Theoretically, if you want to change the shoes or basically remove the drums for any reason, what you have to do is just push that adjuster all the way in, slip the drum back on, nice and easy, put your foot on the brake, and those self-adjusters should click out automatically to push the shoes into contact with the drum to get an efficient brake. That is not what happens on Mark 1s. They are so common for becoming lazy. Mine are no different. Most of you will have very, very poor brake adjusters. If they work, you're in a minority, I can tell you. So what you have to do, once you've done all that gubbins and you've just about slipped the drums back over the shoes, then put the wheel, obviously put everything back together, what you should do is put your foot on the brake, see if it would just come out any more, but I doubt it, since you've just about managed to slip the drums over the shoes. It won't make any difference. But what you will find is an efficient braking system where now you've sorted the adjusters out at the back. You should now be able to adjust this handbrake to come up 4 notches, and you can go to the nearest hill, put it in neutral, take your foot off the brake, obviously put your handbrake on by 4, take your foot off the brake, and it should not roll whatsoever. It should be nice and firm. In fact, I think it shouldn't roll in 3. I think 3 is where it will just about start to catch. 4 should be very good indeed. So that is a top tip. If you've got a sloppy handbrake, I'm afraid it's not because your handbrake cable is very bad or stretched. It's simply because the drum brakes are not adjusted well at the back. It is a very common MOT failure for the rear brakes to be out of balance and need service. So that will be most likely your adjusters. The brake shoes, they last an awful long time. They last absolute years. But the adjusters are the ones that cause the problems. Sometimes the wheel cylinders can leak, which is another issue in itself. I've replaced mine, but mine were actually okay after 20 years, but they can spring a leak within the shoe itself. You'll feel it, your brake pedal will go soft. Big recommendation, if you have a drum brake model and you really want to get rid of them, I would just be very, very wary about one little issue. As I've said before, you cannot get drum brake models with ABS. So you won't have any capacity for ABS system in this car. No motor, no wiring, no nothing, no sensors, okay? Now, to fit a retrofit a system to a current car without ABS would just be, it's just pointless. It's like people that try and fit the digital climate control to a manual climate control car. There's so many things that you would have to sort out. It's just not worth it. Just get a car with digital climate control, ABS. It's just not worth it. But you can fit the disc brakes to the back with that simple conversion of the hubs, the handbrake cables, and all the gubbins that go with it. But because you don't have ABS, you will find the disc brakes will lock up a lot more easier because they're more efficient, and they will lock up. They will lock up under even mediocre to harsh braking. And you will possibly feel a tug at the back. Some people have had no issues at all. But there is something you do get on the drum brake models with basically the non-ABS system, and I'll show you that now. Right. What we have down here, I'm just going to show you from this angle, is we have these two things. Now these two buggers are brake proportioning valves. Now you only get these on the ABS models. Basically those two go through to the rear brakes, one per line, okay? And those brake proportioning valves are simply there to stop or restrict the flow of brake fluid going to those wheels under an emergency or very harsh braking situation. Exactly the same as ABS, but a very crude version, a mechanical valve rather than a computer controlled motor that basically opens and closes valves at will in a much more better and efficient manner. But basically what you'd essentially be doing is putting disc brakes to be used with those brake proportioning valves. Those valves were designed to be used with drum brakes, not discs, and that is why your brakes may lock up a bit more with rear discs on a non-ABS model. It has been done, many people have done so, driven on their cars for years, but it is just something to be very aware of. And last thing really, if you do have this issue where your handbrake has over time gone slopping, it's too high and it doesn't feel positive enough when you pull it up, that is because of the issue I've mentioned about the adjusters not being right. If it's doing that on a disc brake model, I would have a look at the calipers, because the mechanism, there's like a ratchet mechanism inside the calipers, but they're not really known for those issues. Mainly with calipers, they just bind all together and stick shut. Drum brake models don't necessarily have that issue, although I have had issue on cold mornings where the shoes would actually catch on the actual drum. That might be down to the fact that I don't think I put enough copperies on the back plate. When you fit the shoes, you're supposed to put copperies on certain 3 points on each side for each shoe where they actually sit on the backing plate. I may not have put enough on, and that's why they're sticking. But really, honestly, do not adjust that nut if you have this issue on a drum brake model, because all you're going to be doing is stretching your handbrake cable with no additional performance out of badly adjusted rear brakes. It is the adjusters. I'm afraid it is a pain in the ass. If you don't feel confident enough, get a gauge to do it, because that is guaranteed your problem. I've never known a stretched handbrake. I mean, if your handbrake cable is really stretched, what will happen is there will be no more adjustment on that rod, that thread on that adjustment rod for the handbrake. There will be no more adjustment on it. It will literally be at the back end of its thread. You will have no more adjustment, and you know that your handbrake cable is basically stretched to the point of oblivion. And believe you me, there's like that much thread on the end of that handbrake cable, as you've just seen. So really, honestly, don't do it. I think other people may have previously done it on your car, because it is a common used technique. It's a technique that mechanics have used a couple of times, but I don't know why, because it just doesn't have any effect on that back brakes. All you'd have is a stretched handbrake cable, a handbrake cable so taut that it really is, I wouldn't want to put it under that pressure, because I have known handbrake cables to snap under that sort of pressure. But because the drums are so poorly adjusted, you're never going to get some extra performance out of it or overcome an issue at the back. So if you have this issue, that's the problem. And I am going to do a video on this in the summer, because mine, realistically, if I'll just take it off, he's in park. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 I go up to on a hill. So it's still within kind of spec, as long as it's around 4, 5. If it goes up to 6, that's a bit too high. More than that, it needs adjusting. So by the summer, I suspect that I'm going to have to do this again. But I'll no doubt show you, and hopefully just show you practically how easy it could be, or how hard it could be sometimes. They're not easy jobs. But anyway, you take care, guys. I will see you very soon.